Welcome to the Tech Founders Podcast. I'm your host, Marcus Pappin. Today, I'm super excited to be talking with Ross Andrew Paquette from Maripost. Ross, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Marcus.
Ross, super excited to talk to you today. So I'd like to get in with a quick introduction on yourself and Maripost.
Yeah, for sure. So, I'll start with Maripost. That's a little bit easier since my life has been dominated by the company. But founded Maripost about 13 years ago. I come from a marketing automation or email background. So think about that as anybody from like MailChimp to Klaviyo to Salesforce, Marketing Cloud, and so on. And I spent a couple years in sales, and I was always really strong on the product side of things. And I think I just focused on always doing like really great demos, being able to get customers through and focusing on their points and so on. But yeah, we spent it's a bit depressing when I say 13 years, 13 years going from an email marketing platform to an email e-commerce and retail platform to now being marketing automation, help desk, e-commerce, retail, EP, and then AI, and then our retail components of point of sale is launching in the next, I think, like 3 months actually, if not sooner. And so, our major focus is obviously just helping customers to bring all the platforms, as we were discussing earlier, together under one solution, be able to understand like how they really build a profitable business with a partner like Maripost. That's been really the background from the Maripost side of things. And for myself, as you know, I'm from a really small town in Northern Ontario in Canada, about 30,000 people, mining and forestry. Yeah, I mean, grew up playing a lot of sports. I skied for Canada. I rode for Canada as well. Played football or soccer in our terminology for Ontario for a number of years. It's been a while since I've been at that. I got some bad knees now. I guess that's where it comes from. But yeah, and now I spend most of my time in Europe, as we were discussing as well. And yeah, leading the company from here, trying to stay alive, escaping from the middle at the current state. Yeah, come back to that.
Yeah, that was a crazy situation that's
Yeah,
going on there. And crazy that you're in Dubai as it
yeah,
was happening.
yeah. It was the first time. I mean, I guess like for people living in the region, right? When you think of whichever country, but Israel, Lebanon, so on. This is somewhat of a daily occurrence to them, but like looking up and watching rockets or missiles be intercepted literally above your head was a new experience. I'll say that much.
So for context for the listeners, Ross was in Dubai when missiles were being sent to Dubai at the time of the recording, so early March 2026. And he was able to get out and back home safe and sound.
Yeah, yeah. I was less concerned about the missiles, funny enough, and more with just the travel logistics. I guess that's like the founder in me. I'm like, what are we gonna do? What are the stages we have to go through here to exit the risky situation we're in? Yeah.
Yeah, the systematic thinking. That's awesome.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so Ross, when you were starting Maripost, you didn't have a technical background, but now you're running a software company. So how did you go ahead and start it? How did you get that first product built? Did you have a technical co-founder, or how did
I
that
do,
start?
yeah. But it was actually a crazy story. And I can't remember, I was talking to somebody recently and they're like, you need to call Upwork and do like a case study with them. So I started the company working with like this is before, not my current or my co-founder that I have now. Working with a gentleman that was at a company I was working at. And anyway, he was a very unique individual. He actually went on to become one of like the earliest, I guess, developers at Twitch. Again, this is like 13 or years ago. But he would disappear from time to time, and it was just it wasn't a scalable model. And we had customers like right from the beginning because I'd had customers at prior companies. They really wanted to continue working together. And so it got to a point where I was actually just going to shut down the company and go back. I was still working at the time selling construction ERP software of all things at that point. And it was actually my mother said, like, she's like, you can't just go online and like find somebody. And our product is built in Ruby on Rails, or it was at the time and still is today for the most part. And there was like 10 developers in Toronto who were big on Ruby at that point. Like, and I knew them. I had them on like LinkedIn or what have you. And so I was like, there's no way I'm going to find somebody. Let me just like go back to or keep working, do what I was doing because I was doing pretty well there. So anyway, I put a post though up on, it was Odesk at the time now, which is now Upwork. And Jag, who's my CTO and co-founder, he was the first person to respond. And within about 2 weeks, he rebuilt the product or whatever we had at the time, and then it never failed from there. Like we never had a single problem under sort of his regime, let's call it. And then we just kept building from there. So it was pretty crazy in terms of where the company's gone just from one Upwork posting.
That's amazing. And it's super cool to see the companies built with a framework. So I work as a software engineer for a
Yeah.
company, and it's super cool because I remember everything's changed in the world of
Yeah.
software now with
Yeah.
AI. But before, there was always this technical balance that you had to go through of whether or not you want to split up your front end and back end, et cetera. And then you had solutions or frameworks such as Ruby on Rails, which allowed developers to build quickly. And it's
Yeah,
super popular with startups. So it's
for
cool to
sure.
see in two weeks you were able to get the
That's actually
product pretty much up and going. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point that you made about frameworks. Is we've acquired a couple of companies. Sorry, in the last, I was going to say 5 years is what I was thinking there, and one of them didn't use a framework and had sort of like built their own. It is not. It was not fun going through that process, I guess you could say, of like keeping everything organized. It's simply not scalable, I guess, is really what you're describing as well. So I never had as much of an appreciation for that until we did that acquisition and realized, fuck, this is like really messy in terms of, again, how you continue to scale to the next stages with that product, obviously.
Yeah, then mixing in other developers as well. Like if you have Ruby developers, you can pull in Rails developers to any project and they'll be able to figure it out pretty quickly. It's really interesting on this conversation and where it is now with AI because the whole development process is changing every 3 months. So once you started, I know you've talked about your initial plan for Maripost. Was for it to be a lifestyle business, and that's
Yeah.
changed over the years. Do you want to dive into that and the evolution there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was a pretty quick adjustment. I mean, I was talking about this also just last week in a different conversation, but around sort of like the versions that we've gone through at Maripost. And I was trying to tell somebody that this was version two, like not meaning right now. And they're like, version two. They're like, you've gone through like 18 different versions, meaning like from one disaster to one prosperous period. But anyway, in the early stages, as I was saying, I was working for a construction ERP software company, a firm before Maripost, not before, but sort of at the same time. And yeah, I was thinking like, why don't I get 10 customers, do 500,000 a year in revenue? So, at 50,000 a customer on average. And I was living downtown Toronto at the time. So it was nice. Most of the listeners may not know, but there was a Thompson hotel there. There's a pool on the roof. I'm like, this is perfect. All's going to be well. Again, have a couple developers in India as we were just covering with my co-founder who's from there, who coincidentally now lives in Toronto, and I don't even live in Toronto. So that was a bit of a pain. But yeah, so we went from about 300,000 in revenue in early 2014, 26 million in about mid 2026, if I'm not mistaken. And so, yeah, really like nothing had changed either in terms of how we were working. Who's my co-founder, he would obviously develop and write the code for everything. I would just ship over like certain ideas and handle like a little, like most of the user experience. So we were a really great team, despite being like, just like, it wasn't just the two of us, but it was maybe five or six of us at the time going through that process. So really like explosive from that perspective. All I ever did was focus on the customer. And I think it's interesting too, because, we can talk about the sort of later journey, and it becomes harder, of course, to now we have 5,000 customers and much more difficult to take all their feedback if a lot of the infrastructure isn't put in place. Yeah, that was that sort of initial stage.
An amazing that's an amazing growth story. So 300,000 to 26 million in about 3 years time
It was
with
about 20 months. Yeah.
wow. So, and how were you able to handle that from a customer service perspective? Because in that, you're onboarding hundreds of more clients or dozens or even hundreds of more clients at
Mhm.
that point. I can't do that multiple in my head of what 100,000 something percentage that is, because that's a
Yeah.
humongous growth. So how were you able to handle that?
Yeah, at the start it was heavily myself. I think you've also heard the story. Like it was basically just me in my apartment with my partner at the time, and she said, you can work as many hours a day as you want, but like every time you close a new customer, you have to take me for a nice dinner. Back then, a nice dinner was like $200 Canadian. Now, I don't think that model would work. But yeah, like it's sorry, early, like in that, let's call it like maybe 300 to even like 10 million. It was mostly me. And then we started hiring some great people. So I still, you mentioned Diana Ross, who was, really my right hand woman who's gone on to become the co-founder of retention.com. You know them as well, or for anybody who doesn't. Myself and her really just managed the entire like sales process. She would find the opportunities and so on, source the opportunities, and really I would come in, do the product demo, and we would close the deals together. But it started happening, from a closure perspective every day. And these weren't small opportunities. These weren't like $2,000 a month or even 2,000 a year. These were like 50,000, 100,000, 200, 500,000 a year example. So that really helped the scale. But it was interesting because then we got to a point, it was right around that 26 million, or maybe a little bit after, where like, we would lose a customer and we would gain a customer. It was, I think a lot of founders, when they have been in that scenario, there is a ceiling when it comes to this, like, when do we hire a VP of sales or VP of marketing or whatever it is. And for me, it was 26 million. So we figured out almost the exact number to which it couldn't, not it couldn't, like it would just grow incrementally, but it went from, 400% growth down to like, 30% growth, I guess you could say. So anyway, we'll come back to that, but interesting period from that growth perspective.
From the technical perspective, was it a lot more development work that you guys had to accommodate with that sort of growth, or was the engineering team able to stay pretty constant throughout that
It
time?
definitely got much slower. If Jag were here right now, you would say the same. As soon as we started like moving from like a 6 or 10 person team to, to teams, I would say that there's this part is very depressing, a good 8 years in the company where really nothing happened. From a development perspective, we just, I think you're aware, we sold part of the business and all secondary deal. Nothing really happened for that 3 year period. Then we bought it back, cleaned it up, meaning like the revenue and so on. Then COVID happened not long after that. And then actually, sorry, then during COVID, then we started acquiring companies. But from that development perspective, it really changed dramatically. I would say just now in the last 6, maybe 8 months is the first time I felt like, wow, we're all really rowing in the same direction again that we were, basically 10 years ago, which, like I said, is a bit depressing now that I bring it up.
It's very interesting though, because you were able to retain, I don't know what your churn number is, et cetera, but you guys were able to retain and still grow the business without a lot of new features being pushed out, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, we built a lot really fast, like in that same period that we were discussing, the 2014 to 2016. Had we not gone down different journeys, again, like it is what it is, we'd probably be 10 times the size now that we were back then. It just, we lost sort of like that, like kind of what I was talking about with Jag, like that direct connection between hit my vision and his vision. It's my vision from a product perspective, his vision from a, technology perspective. And we never ran into any like technology challenges from that perspective, like, which is amazing. I'll really never forget that. And I think it's also because I had a lot of both confidence and respect in him, and of course his capabilities to make the right decisions. Like, I never really ventured into like, hey, should we be using this language or changing to that or so on? And I'm sure there's a couple things we could have done differently. I don't want to speak for him, but would we have continued to use, we went to Vue.js from a front end. Maybe we should have taken React as an example. Ruby's another one, right? Is there enough Ruby developers out there? Is there something else that could have been better? But I think in the end, I would say, just finishing on that technology bit, we have never had a single problem with scale. Like if a customer came in, if the largest customer in the world came in from a data perspective, at least like as it relates to our product, we wouldn't have a problem servicing them, which is kind of crazy in my opinion.
That's amazing because I'm thinking through it as a software engineer. So for the company I'm working for, we build software for accountants, and we recently released our first product, which is going through tax season right now. So
Yeah.
we're dealing the first tax season. It's the first race we're going through. So we're seeing a lot of those growing pains, getting people onto the app, dealing with bugs that come up, etc.
Yeah.
So I'm imagining this perspective of what I'm living through now and then applying that to you guys when you're going from 300,000 to 26 million and trying to understand what that would look like from a
Yeah.
technical perspective because that the amount of customers is growing exponentially.
Well, the customer count was never high because the customers were large. So it was like, I think we only had 250 customers. It's not to say we had 250 accounts, right? Some customers would have 10 accounts, but not all of them, or not that many. None of this was ever much of a concern. I shouldn't say it was never any concern. As soon as we also moved to Google Cloud, who I can't advocate enough, having worked with Azure and AWS as well. So you rarely hear me talk about vendors, but Google Cloud was a major shift. Like, our platform has not been down. I think it was down twice, partially because of things that happened on the Google side. Somebody put a hash where they shouldn't have. And but yeah, otherwise like that was a big change, and moving from like the still great companies and everything, but who were we on before that? Rackspace, and then there was another one before that where you're dealing with physical hardware, which again, we didn't have many problems there, but you're still dealing with servers on a one-to-one basis.
Awesome. So I know you have a very customer focused mentality that you put the customer first. You spend a lot of time talking to customers. Can you dive into where that philosophy developed, how that's grown over the years, and yeah, just really where you got that perspective from and how
Yeah,
it served you?
I mean, right at the start, when you're on the sales side of things, you want your customers to be successful, right? Especially if you're in a situation where if the customer leaves after 3 months and you've got to claw back a crank, and this is a long time ago, it's like 17 years ago now, when I was in direct sales. So it started from that. I mean, I really wanted and I believed I had a really good product that I was selling to before. I was very much ahead of its time. This is not Maripost, the one I was selling before. And so it gave people a lot of the functionality that was like really exciting. Today would be maybe a little bit less exciting, but again, that was 17 years ago. And so from there, I've focused on the support side. And actually, the reason I started Maripost originally was because I saw the level of support that people were getting. And I was like, you're paying $5,000 a month and like you can't get a hold of anybody, tickets get responded to in 24, 48, whatever ridiculous amount of hours. So for me, that was the starting point. Like, and I was the support rep. So it's like I have an alias. I think it's still in our support system. Probably shouldn't say this part, but named Tom Browning. Cause I was like, you can't have Ross on everything, right? And it just looks like, again, and we had big customers, like we had Mercedes Benz as a customer. And if Ross was the CEO and sales rep and then the support rep and then the other one, it's not to say that they wouldn't have still chosen us, but anyway, so I was responding to the chats and I was answering the tickets and we had live chat like 30 again. It sounds strange to say it now because like everybody has that or they should at the very least, but then no one had live chat as part of their product. They had it more on the sales side and so on, but like it wasn't actually embedded into people's products where it's like I'm creating a campaign. Ross, like not Ross, but like Tom, sorry, how do I do this? Or how do I create this or what have you? So we had a really, really strong response time, under 5 minutes, 24 hours a day, even, and that was not when it was just me. I had to sleep at some point, but it really started from there. And I would say now it's like, I think this happens in a lot of cases where I mean, of course you get to scale and you get further away from the customer. And I would say that, also for the first time in 10 years, I feel like I'm on the cusp of being able to get back to my customers full time is what I mean. Like I love the idea that like every customer has my email, every customer has my phone number. I don't know if we did that just yet, but I think that that's very important to the vision and growth strategy, not growth being revenue, just like growth of the business as to where I want to take it. And so, over the 10 years, it was really like it went in waves, but it definitely went on a downward slope from that customer standpoint from me, not, their service and support. But I think it's just really important anyway. That's what I'm getting at to come back to it.
That's amazing. How were you able to manage your time? Well, obviously you had people writing you constantly, but you're also doing sales calls. How were you able to manage that in your day to day?
And you must have seen this before or heard this before. So I used to work with like two computers, a right hand and a left hand mouse. And there's a customer. I wish if he was here right now, he'd be cracking some video game joke. But he was at a company. Actually, you know them, entrepreneur.com. No, not entrepreneur. Sorry, success.com. So the publishing company. I can say this because he's now a friend of mine. He's like, what are you doing? Because I was doing the demo, like fully like listening one. And so on. He's like, what else are you doing right now? He's like, we can see your eyes like moving back and forth, moving back and forth. And I was like, actually like playing a video game on this other computer I have. But like the joke is really, or the story is really more that I used to be able to work in that format. So I could answer tickets on one side. And I would say like admin has really been one of my like personal superpowers. When I was in sales, it wasn't because like I was great at, I mean, maybe I was, maybe I wasn't, but like, it wasn't necessarily because I was great at converting customers. I was just great at going through all of the leads, calling them, taking them through the process, putting all my notes in Salesforce. Like that was the stronger area. So I took that into that early stage of Maripost, which it was kind of interesting because at one point, this is many years ago, and I think it was like our VP of marketing. He's like, we went and looked and he's like, you had to hire like 60 people to do what you were doing by yourself before. It probably wasn't that many, but like that's what he said at the time. And so I think that that is a huge value add, or not value add, but like area of focus that a lot of founders get lost on, right? This is where like the difference between being bootstrapped and funded, comes into play as well as a topic. Anyway, I'll pause there and we can come back to that.
That is amazing. It's very funny to think about because if I reflect on my work as a software engineer, usually you try to focus on one thing at once, get that done, and move on. AI is changing all of that to where I'm spinning up as many agents as I can keep in my head at once, letting them work and balancing that while I'm testing various tickets. I'm taking a look at what the agent's doing. I test it, take a look at another one, etc. So it's been a learning process for me to balance more things in my head at once. But it's interesting to hear that you were doing that 10 years ago, 10 plus years ago on calls.
That's, what I think though is like some of the strongest founders, and again, this is, I'll bring back up what I just said about bootstrap versus not. Adam Robinson from Retention as well speaks a lot, focuses a lot on the bootstrap side of things. So I'm just gonna grab some water here. And
Yeah, no problem.
that's the biggest thing. It's like I like to use the term multi-threaded, right? You're in tech, so of course you're familiar with that. The founders that can really manage from a multi-threaded aspect are going to be the most successful, right? The people who can literally put things into columns or rows or whichever analogy you prefer and work them at the same time, during on any given day. I think that's probably one of the most important things to do as well. I always focused on what I had to do that day. So if it was signing a customer or answering tickets or dealing with new customers, whatever it was able to like prioritize that on like a daily basis, not on a weekly basis, not a fucking monthly basis, definitely not quarterly or annually. And I think that's also, again, like that's a different element where founders will sacrifice a percentage of their company because they don't necessarily want to do that work. It's not that they don't want to do it either. I shouldn't even say that. It's more like they don't think of doing it that way. So if somebody said to themselves, like, I'm going to start this business, I've got, a good technical co-founder as an example, Ross or Marcus or whoever the CEO is going to do marketing and sales and customer success and support, and their technical lead is going to take on obviously let's say the development side of things and the IT side of things and so on. People really like jump into the strategy more. It's like, I'm going to go hire all these people, right? And I need money to hire them. So I'm going to raise 5 million. And that becomes a big part of their, kind of individual drive. I sincerely doubt, most of the people I know who founded companies who were then funded were in the early stage thinking like, how am I going to do like 2 hours of sales and 2 hours of CS? Like those things weren't necessarily on their roadmap met from a mental perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting to think about with the bootstrapping versus, we can dive into that a bit, where you're putting on constraints on yourself to where you don't have this big bucket of money that you can then deploy in various ways to hire people. You're really forced to focus on what you can using the resources that you have. I also have one buddy who had a software company, built it up, sold it for multiple 8 figures, and one of the things he tells me constantly is exactly what you were saying. He was always responding to the support tickets because he knew that that's what the true customer problems were. And that feedback was able to build over time. It was the same sort of thing, a bootstrap company. I think he had it up to 20 people before selling.
Yeah.
So I know you're huge on bootstrapping. You did raise money at Maripost, and I know I've heard that you've told that story before, where you got the equity back. So where did this perspective come from bootstrapping versus raising money, and why have you kept this perspective the same or very similar, I would say, for the last 10, 15 plus years of Maripost?
Sorry, you mean like where how have I brought it back?
Yeah, like where did the bootstrapping mentality come from versus
Sorry.
raising VC money?
Really, I had no experience in funding. So it wasn't even a thought in my mind. I was like, I'm starting a business. We have to make money. Let's just keep making money. And by the time people knew, like when I say people more in the like finance area, investment banking or a VC or PE firm arena, we were already at that 26 million. So we skipped all of those stages, right? Like a 26 million revenue business in SaaS in 2026 will probably be doing its Series B or Series C, something in that range, maybe a little bit lower, but B for sure. So you skip all those stages, right? And then, and we were also very profitable. We are today as well. So we didn't need the money. And I think that also, again, continues to carry forward. If you're profit or bootstrapped and profitable, why would you even start looking at funding unless it was some ridiculous amount of money? And even that comes with strings attached that typically create different challenges as well. So anyway, that was where it came from, just that starting point.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, once you have the strong start there and you're able to have that profitability built in, it's
Mm.
different than the VC model to where
Yeah,
sometimes they're not profitable for years before
exactly.
actually turning the tide there. So you mentioned back in 2016, you guys released or you had the idea around an AI product that's coming to fruition now. Do you want to talk about how it seems like 2016 was a big year because that's when you guys reached the 26
Yeah.
million. There's a lot of changes. There's this AI product now. But yeah, do you want to dive into what that initial idea was and then how it's transitioning to what you're building now?
Yeah. So it's, as I said a couple times, actually, it's kind of sad when I think about it, right? We're in 26 now. I can send you the press release after. It was March 2017 when we issued that. And so the original, um, yeah, the original idea was that we were just going to move through these stages where the product would be telling the customer what to do or what they should do. So that it would start off by more of a trigger based mentality. You're running a customer journey from a message perspective, or you're creating a campaign, or you're running an A B test. It would start to make recommendations to do those things, right? Or not to do those things, to change those things or to make adjustments around the data or queries that you were putting in place based on what the application could see. So, like, if Marcus thought that his top purchasing customer from, say, like an e-com or retail perspective was a I don't know 29-year-old female from New York, and then we have all the data in the application, and it could run a query and just tell you, hey, actually. It turns out it's not. It's like a 35-year-old from Florida or something like that. You'll start to make those adjustments in terms of the campaigns or audiences or so on that you were building. And then the focus was for it to move through the stages where one would be the notifications, two would be the notification, and then click here to like implement this thing, or not implement, click here to create. The third one would be click here to implement, and then the fourth one would be like click here and we'll just do it for you, basically just run it for you. Which is ironic because I think it was only like 6 months ago where we started looking at that functionality in Google for Google Ads as an example, where there's a name for it, but you can just basically check it off where Google Gemini or what have you runs your ad campaigns. Again, different for us on the marketing automation or email and SMS side of things. But now not only are we still doing that, what I just referenced, or that going through that direction, now we have the tools where that, of course you can run that in an automated format. We don't have to put technology or our view, as individuals in terms of what we think triggers should be or notifications should be or so on. And so now it's gotten more into like, yeah, pre-building a lot of those elements, designing campaigns, graphic from that perspective. Still the advisory pieces, but I think that is still in the infancy stage of things. Meaning, again, like, we want our customers to come in and the app is telling them, hey, this is a campaign that you should send to these people today, as an example, or here's a journey that you should create today, or here's 10 of your products that you are not promoting. These should be at the top of your, e-commerce shop. And you could go on and on and on. Like when we start talking about retail, right? Like staffing and timing and sales hours and peak times. And you can go in a number of different directions there, but yeah, that's really where things are heading. And like I said, it's been now like 10 years and I feel like we are launching more now than we ever were before. And that's ironically, you were talking about the AI from a development perspective. We're also just now starting to benefit from that. I would say the 6 months that we spent just launching all of these new products and new functions and features and so on is really just going to continue to amplify because of that.
Amazing. When you're launching these new products, obviously it's a lot. I feel like we're at a very interesting time where people like us who are in the technical space are seeing firsthand the developments of AI, which is going to come to us first because it's developers who are building the AI and they're going to build it for the thing they know best, which is developers, which leads to software kind of moving really fast and the rest of the world kind of catching up,
Pitching
which
up.
is
Yeah.
it's a very interesting time because it gives a lot of benefits to us to try new things. But then you have to answer the question, how do you communicate this to the rest of the world? How do you make sure that you're building the right thing? How do you really talk to your customers? I know you have that as one of your core values. So as you're going and releasing new products, what's your process looking like for really understanding the customer need there and then being able to build something around that?
Yeah. So today, I don't know that we're doing this 100% to what I'm about to say, but my philosophy has always been that 50% comes from sort of like our vision or our innovation as a company, and the other 50% comes from the customer side of things. So, what do people want, and what are they voting for? I mean, I think that the best companies out there from that secondary or not secondary, but from that section around the customer side of things, they're running amazing ideas portals. Just what do we need, right? What you were talking about, like the company you're working for being in tax software, right? What is the number one thing they want to build? Okay, let's just build that if that's got the highest amount of votes. But then again, you need your other teams to be building out that continued vision that wraps around all those usually or typically individual features and functions to really like make those leapfrog or provide those leapfrog moments for a customer. So as an example, like us going from marketing automation to a multi-product solution to like a holistic solution, let's call it, meaning where like the client, our customers can log in now and not like, of course, users will have to go in to set up stores and things of that nature, but they can just see like, here's the roadmap of how my business is performing from start to finish, not like fragmented pieces like you typically see elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's going to be so valuable going forward, where the ability to build has become a lot easier, which
I was just,
allows one platform who's really focused on a specific type of business to build a lot for that business. Because as we were
yeah.
talking about earlier, it's really tough when there's 15 different apps you have to sign into to actually get your job done.
Well, and what you were saying, I mean, this is where AI will play a role. Is like the companies, whether it's Maripost or somebody else, but the companies who have like a sizable vision are going to succeed because these like the feature based companies that exist out there, people are number one going to be willing to forego some of those features because they're going to say like, I get 80% of what I want from this platform. I'm going to go with that. And, if they have a plugin for said thing or a partnership with that company, maybe we'll keep it. But a lot of times, like people do wipe out those, kind of extras that maybe like weren't really driving as much of the revenue, but were creating a lot of the complexity. And the other thing is that, as you were just discussing, like we as a company are going to be enabled to build the things that these, let's call it third party apps or feature based apps are doing, if it makes sense within, within a week or two using some of the solutions you were discussing earlier. So I think that's going to be the big change. It's really going to consolidate even more because again, it's also going to create different challenges. Like again, we were talking earlier, our customers, right? Like just what we are discussing around like this war or combat in the Middle East. Now, this is going to affect shipping. This is going to affect oil prices. This is going to affect transportation. This is going to affect travel. There's so many levels of impact in just that one example. The same can be said for this tariff process that the US has been going through. I mean, it just creates conflict and complexity in organizations who are reasonably like razor thin from a profitability perspective. So it's like, it's not going to be like you have a bad quarter, like, or, not enough product moves in a quarter. It's like, if we have a bad month, like you can be in a really difficult position is what I'm noticing more and more.
From somebody who works in runs a software company and is seeing all of these developments and for everything we just talked about to where these things are happening in the world, you're well positioned to go and solve a lot of these problems. Given that you've been doing this for 10 plus years, you're well positioned to take advantage of the technology and really move it to the next step. What are some of the things that you're most excited for going forward, seeing these rapid developments in the ability to produce software?
I don't know if excited is the right word right now. I think that,
If it's not exciting, it could be something else. Where do you see it going forward? It could be fear.
yeah, it's probably more fear than excited. And this is a unique day to be asking about that, given the last like few days. Like it just what we're my fear is that we're in this like endless cycle right now of like one absurd challenge, it's like in terms of humanity after another, and we are so addicted from a consumption perspective that it's impacting how we live our lives. It's impacting how we run businesses or work at have jobs and so on at businesses and so on as well. So I have a little more fear around that side of things than I do excitement around a lot of this technology. So I mean, I think it's great that you can consume just an even further endless amount of information, from an AI perspective. I run ridiculous 2 a.m. queries around financial projections, increases or changes from a anyway. I was going to say quantum computing perspective, but I don't think that everybody is doing that. I think they're using it for probably a little more silly things, the same way we think about like, oh, the internet's going to change the world. Everybody has access to everything now. And I'm like, well, it doesn't really seem to be solving the problem from an educational perspective. So I know that's not really the answer you were looking for, but I think it is exciting that these tools are being made available to pretty much everybody. I wish that, or I'd be excited if I thought that people were going to use it more from a growth perspective than I think we do today. And I don't think we, as a society, use it enough from a growth perspective because we're so used to just social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, threads, whatever, where it's like this endless cycle of relative nonsense, to be honest.
You talk about the fear. Is it more? It's I guess it's not a fear in the realm of business in general. It's sort of all of humanity that you're looking at. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. I mean, because like from the business side of things, again, like people are always going to buy products or, yeah, for the most part, short of the end of the world coming. Our economic standpoint is still going to have, challenges. I think I would love to say, like I said, or as I was saying, I wished it was more excitement, but from an AI perspective, I don't think that there's enough conversation taking place around how that's truly going to impact a bulk of the jobs that exist today, right? We're seeing, Google lays off 5,000 and Salesforce lays off 2 and Microsoft, 15 or 20, right? These are the tip of the spear in terms of that, right? The most progressive companies literally on the planet. What happens when that whole middle layer of organization starts to do the same? And the other challenge is what happens with, a lot of the blue collar jobs that are being automated as well. Like we are, despite all the failures, I think, from different companies in the self-driving sphere, I would say that we're, months, not 12 months maybe, but maybe 24 months or something of that sort, to which we have automated transportation, which is like one of the largest, jobs on the planet, just the movement of physical goods around the world. When that becomes automated, who are those, millions and millions of people in those industries working for? Where are they getting jobs? I think that's a really interesting. I was talking about this the other day as well. There's a new strategy in coming out of China where all of the electronic vehicles, none of them will come with their own battery. You will just have a hot swap battery, be dropped into your car whenever you go to charge it. You're removing all of that infrastructure that exists today, even with, say, the current like charging side of things, but like going back to more petroleum based. Again, I could get into a number of these different examples, but we'll be here for the next 10 hours. So I think that those are some of the more of the concerns I have from a global perspective.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So, for example, I'm in Colombia right now, and one of the things that's happening here is the first shipment of Teslas on a large scale are coming here. So they
Yeah,
have 10,000 Teslas arriving in April, and there was no
right.
Teslas here before. So it's
Yeah.
interesting to see even other places that are a bit slower to modernize, do modernize. I think some of the ideas people have around that is eventually the technology will get to a point to where the needs of people can be produced by the machines and no one's quote unquote has nothing to do. Like they will have their needs taken care of, which is it is like that in a lot in Canada, for example. Obviously, there's people with really tough lives there, but no one really goes hungry in Canada,
Currently, they
which
have
is
jobs.
exactly. And that's the meaning part is where it gets complicated because we derive so much meaning from our work.
What do I mean the meaning though? I mean, literally, you're like you get paid by the company you work for, correct?
Yeah.
What happens when, hypothetically that goes away and there's no other opportunity to replace that opportunity? That's more of what I'm talking about because, and it's more along the lines of like, how does that transition happen? Right. So we're both Canadian as an example. At what point does the Canadian government start to create a shift where, as you were describing, where machines, robotics, what have you, AI is taking over like the bulk of our day to day work. Okay, well that's great, but like, how do we buy things? Like, where do those funds come from? They have to come from somewhere, right? So is it coming from the sale of natural resources? Is it coming from taxation? What does that taxation look like? Anyway, this is not so much on a tech founder topic necessarily, but that's one of the things that like it doesn't keep me up at night so much just yet, but it's heavily top of mind when you're asking about sort of fears or excitement. I'll come back to you on the if something excites me in the next few months. That's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really interesting to think ahead on like where the world's going to go, even on these sort of larger levels, because at the end of the day, that impacts downstream what we're going to be doing. I look at businesses, at the end of the day, a business, if you go all the way down, it's serving a consumer at some way or another. Like you work with B2B companies who are selling products to consumers. So I love thinking about, yeah, what will like the human being, the consumer's life look like, and how will that extrapolate up into the businesses. So, Ross, we're winding down here. I'd like to talk about kind of a few reflective questions about your time at Maripost and your entrepreneurial career. If you had to really summarize like one of the biggest lessons that you've learned throughout this time, what would it be?
It would definitely relate to the people side of things. I wish I would have spent more time, or I wish it didn't take me 13 years to get to a point where I feel like I'm finally really, really strong from a much stronger from a hiring perspective. I think that it's really, really hard to hire these days. And again, I'm obviously thinking more from like a mid to senior level, but I think that's one of the areas that I would put the most amount of effort into. That's one of the most difficult challenges. So, getting to a point where you're really understanding what it is that you need, as opposed to say selling people on like why they should come work at your company, becomes like a pretty big change. And all the founders I know have gone through this in a pretty significant way, where they've made the wrong hires, but it really comes down to like the approach. As soon as I started, and this came from one of our advisory board members who built up Shopify Plus, he said, as soon as you start hiring as if you want the person to turn down the job, or you don't want the person to come work here, the dynamic changes heavily, because you start being very honest with them about what things look like. And we've always been honest with people, like these are the good, these are the bad. But I think what it produced was more of a they're still interested in coming here because they know everything, but we don't have a really good understanding of like, are they capable of doing this job? And when you take that sort of negative approach to it, they start to really have to answer questions in a much more difficult way that they can't hide from. Like, how are you going to build out a sales team of 15 people and make sure they're all successful? How are you going to ensure the development organization, right, is productive and has high velocity from that perspective? I find the real, not answers, but like the real comfort in the answers that are presented comes from that sort of like negative or reverse style of interviewing. And again, all the same people that we know mutually, they've gone through the same challenge that I've had. Hey, like, come to company X. It's awesome here. Like, we're doing all these great things. Yeah, we have some challenges. Here's the challenges, but you skip over that. Hey, I need a fucking psychopath to come in and drive sales equally, if not more, with more intensity and insanity as I would as the founder. Getting people to really answer that honestly is much harder than I thought 10 years ago. Like, I'm the type of guy where somebody's like, yeah, that's no problem, I can do all that. I'm like, perfect, this sounds amazing, great relationship. 6 months in, okay, what's happening? Like, why is nothing moving? Why is nothing changing? And that's the typical founder challenge I think that most of us go through. And a lot of companies as well, now we were talking about funding before, like, they just bought their way to that. Instead of like getting the right person, they spent another $1 million hiring a team below them to do most of the work that person probably should have been doing in the first place. So, that creates another area of conflict. And it's why, there are so few, if any, profitable startups or profitable companies, even in the scaling and mid-market perspective. I mean, there's two companies in particular in the spaces that we work in, Attentive and Klaviyo. They've raised over $1 billion. $1 billion. Like, that is an obscene amount of money. And I'm like, what do you spend that on? Because if somebody gave me $1 billion, I'd probably put 50 million in Maripost and spend the other 950, I don't know, building spaceships or something like that. But so I think that's an important like factor of how you have to decide on this path that you're going on. It's like, make sure you're getting the right person in the place. Make sure you're as hard on them as humanly possible. Make sure you put them through the ropes. Don't just go through this like short interview stage of like, hey, I like you, you like me. Like, let's just try to do this together. And really get down to like, this is going to be nearly impossible. You're going to hate it most of the time. But if that's for you, great. Like, let's continue the conversation. To me, that's the number one thing, coming back to what I've learned over the last 10 years.
That's amazing. Yeah, because really, once it's presented like that, your belief and your conviction in what you're doing has to be so strong. Because, yeah, once it's there, you can overcome all of those things around it. So it's really cool to hear that you put that out there. And that kind of allows, is that conviction there? Is that belief there? And then if it is, well, those problems will be something that you can solve and you can view it through that aspect.
For sure. That makes sense.
Awesome. Ross, where can people find you online?
I mean, Maripost.com, obviously. I used to post a little bit on Instagram, but I'm scaling that back as well. But yeah, I just say Maripost for the most part.
Awesome. Great. Ross, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you.
Yeah. Same to you. Thanks, Marcus.